The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged ridgelines of the desert, casting long shadows over the parched earth as Jake Collins knelt beside the lifeless body of his younger brother, Jack. The two of them had been inseparable, growing up side by side in the dusty hills of Arizona, chasing wild mustangs, and working cattle as if the land itself was their second skin. They had seen plenty of danger over the years, cattle rustlers, rattlesnakes, and harsh winters, but none of it had prepared Jake for this moment. Jack had been his world. The younger brother who'd always been full of fire, a streak of mischief in his eyes that never seemed to dim, no matter how rough the world got. He was quick with a laugh, quick with his fists when needed, and always ready for a fight if someone insulted their name. But now, as Jake stared down at him, the fire in Jack's eyes was extinguished forever, replaced by the cold, glassy gaze of death. The gunshot wound on Jack's chest was clean, a single bullet that had found its mark and ended his life before the sound of the shot had even fully registered in the air. Jake had arrived too late, just moments after his brother had taken the fall. The wind howled mournfully, the only sound in the stillness of the desert. The dry earth seemed to close in around Jake as he sat back on his heels, struggling with the weight of the grief, the confusion, and the rage that swirled inside him. Who had done this? Why had it happened? And why had he not been there to protect him? He reached for Jack's shirt, his fingers trembling slightly as he unbuttoned it, preparing to carry his brother home. But as his hand brushed over Jack's pocket, a small piece of folded paper caught his attention. Jake pulled it free, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't seen this letter before. Jack had always been a man of few words, and Jake couldn't imagine what kind of letter would be tucked into his brother's pocket at a time like this. With trembling hands, he unfolded it, his breath catching in his throat as the words slowly revealed themselves. Jake stared down at the letter, his eyes struggling to make sense of the words written in a delicate, unfamiliar handwriting. His breath hitched as he read the first lines. "Dearest Jack, I don't know how to say this, and I fear I might never have the courage to tell you in person. But there's a truth I need you to know. A truth I've carried with me, alone, for far too long." The words burned into his chest, a cold realization settling over him like a heavy shroud. Jack had never mentioned any letters, any secrets, or any regrets. He wasn't the type to leave behind something so intimate, so raw. Yet here it was, the confession of a man who had always been larger than life, and Jake felt his gut tighten in ways he couldn't explain. "I've loved you, Jack. I've loved you in ways I shouldn't. But my heart can't be denied anymore. I need you to know that I never wanted this to be the way it is. But the love I have for you, it's always been there, even when I couldn't say it, even when I had to pretend like everything was normal. I don't know if you'll ever understand. I don't know if I can keep hiding anymore." Jake's eyes burned with the sting of unshed tears, but he couldn't look away. The letter continued, its words blurring together as his heart pounded in his ears. His mind raced, trying to piece together what Jack had left behind. "There's someone else in my life now, someone I never thought I'd find after you. But if you find this letter, then you'll know the truth, I never could forget you. Please don't hate me for this. I've never meant to hurt you." The final words on the page were written hastily, almost frantically. "Jack, I'm so sorry. I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive me, one day. Please, take care of yourself. I'll be with you, always. Underscore 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 underscore. Jake's hands trembled violently as he finished reading, the paper slipping from his fingers. His mind raced, overwhelmed by the words that had just shattered the image of his brother he had carried for so long. Jack, the fiery, carefree soul, had loved him. Loved him in a way that went beyond brotherhood. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath his boots shifting in a dizzying whirl. He couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was reading. His brother had carried this secret, hidden deep inside him, locked away like a prisoner. And now, with Jack gone, all that was left was the ghost of a confession too heavy to bear. As the weight of it settled on him, Jake realized there was no one to blame, not the world, not Jack, and certainly not himself. There was only the silence of the desert around him, the wind that had begun to pick up again, and the cold, empty feeling in his chest. The sky had darkened by the time Jake carefully folded the letter and tucked it into the pocket of his shirt. The world felt small and hollow around him, as though the ground beneath his boots had lost its steadiness. His brother, the man who had once been his entire world, had been hiding a truth so vast, so monumental, that Jake couldn't begin to comprehend it. He pulled Jack's body onto the back of his horse with a steady hand, despite the turmoil inside. There was no time for tears now. The world demanded action. He couldn't leave his brother here. He couldn't leave him alone in the dust of the desert. The ride back to the ranch was long and grueling, each mile adding more weight to his shoulders. The darkness of the night seemed to pull at him, as though the land itself was grieving. The familiar hills and dry plains blurred in the dim light, but all Jake could focus on was the letter, the truth it held, and the brother he never truly knew. With each turn of the horse's hooves, his mind played out all the questions that now haunted him. Had Jack truly loved him in the way the letter suggested? Was there any way Jake could have known? Would it have changed things between them? Or had Jack carried that love in silence, afraid to speak it for fear of the world's judgment? Jake's heart felt heavy in his chest, like a stone lodged there, impossible to move. The moon hung high above, casting pale silver light across the desert. A cool breeze brushed past him, stirring the dust in the air. Yet, in all that vast emptiness, Jake felt utterly alone. The ranch house was just ahead, a faint silhouette against the night sky. But it was no longer home to him. Not without Jack. When they reached the house, Jake hesitated before entering. The door stood open, as it always had, the warmth from inside spilling out into the night. But it didn't feel like a welcome. It felt like an invitation to face a truth he wasn't ready to confront. Jake dismounted and carried his brother inside, laying him gently on the bed. His eyes scanned the room, the place where he and Jack had shared so many moments, their childhood, their triumphs, their losses. Everything seemed different now. There was a heaviness in the air, a silence that had taken root in the very walls. Jake stood there for a moment, looking down at his brother's body, the letter still weighing heavily in his pocket. The truth had already been spoken, yet it felt like there were still so many things left unsaid. The fire in the hearth flickered low, casting long shadows across the room. It was the kind of night that made everything feel endless, like time had stopped and was watching him, waiting for him to decide what came next. The hours passed in a quiet haze. Jake hadn't slept a wink. He sat by the fire, staring into the embers, the crackling wood a distant sound as his thoughts consumed him. The letter, now resting in his hands, felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone far removed from the world he had known with Jack. He turned it over again, reading the words for the 10th time, but each time, they hit differently. Dearest Jack. The words echoed in his mind, and with each passing second, they seemed to grow in weight. The confusion was gnawing at him. His mind played out scenarios: where had Jack gone, who had been the other person in his life, and how could he have missed it all? They had shared everything, the two of them. Every hard-earned dollar, every scrape, every memory, every triumph. How had Jack been so different, so closed off, and yet so honest in the end? The sound of footsteps at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. He had been waiting for this moment. The door creaked open slowly, and standing in the threshold was Clara, Jack's fiancée, or, at least, that was how the town had known her. The woman Jake had never fully understood. She was the quiet one, the lady with soft eyes and a gentle smile, who had appeared out of nowhere years ago and had somehow made her way into Jack's heart. Her eyes were red, the evidence of her own grief clear, but there was something else there too. A kind of knowing, a secret that had yet to be revealed. She stood there, just beyond the doorframe, looking at Jake, hesitant. "I came to help." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "To say goodbye, to him?" Jake didn't say anything at first. His mouth was dry, his thoughts tangled in knots. "You knew, didn't you?" he finally asked, his voice rough. The words tumbled out before he could stop them, his frustration rising. About Jack, and about what he felt. Clara looked down, her hands trembling as she wiped away a stray tear. She nodded slowly. "I knew. I knew long before he ever said anything. I don't think he ever really wanted to, Jake. I think he was just waiting for you to see it. But," and she paused, swallowing hard. "I think he was waiting for the right time to tell you. He never meant to hurt you. He loved you, too. In his way. But it was complicated." Jake felt his heart tighten, a cold ache spreading through him. It wasn't the words he wanted to hear, but they were the ones he needed. Clara stepped forward, her gaze locked on Jack's body. "Why didn't you tell him?" Jake asked, his voice low, accusing, but he couldn't stop the words. He couldn't stop the need for answers. He had to understand. Clara sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Because we were both too afraid," she said softly. "Afraid of the world's judgment. Afraid of losing him, and you." He wanted to be free of that secret. He wanted you to understand, but it was something too hard for him to say aloud. And when it was too late, when he finally tried to reach out, he was gone before he could tell you. Jake turned his face toward the fire, staring at the flames as if they could answer his questions. His mind reeled. It didn't make sense. His brother, his flesh and blood, had loved him in a way that had always been hidden, and now he would never know how it had all truly felt. Clara knelt beside him, laying her hand gently on his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "But Jack was just trying to protect you. In his way." Jake closed his eyes, swallowing the knot that had formed in his throat. The man he had once known, the brother who had shared everything with him, had been a stranger in a way. And now, all that was left were pieces, the memories, the letter, and the silence that filled the space between them. The weight of it was too much to bear. The morning after was colder than usual. The air had a bite to it, the kind of chill that cut through to the bone, reminding Jake that life moved forward, indifferent to his grief. He sat by the window, watching as Clara prepared the small plot behind the house where Jack would be buried. She moved slowly, almost reverently, her hands steady as she worked. She hadn't said much since their conversation the night before, but Jake could feel her presence beside him, quiet, understanding, but also carrying her own weight of grief. Jack had meant something to her too, in ways Jake could not fully comprehend. The morning sun flickered over the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, and for a brief moment, Jake felt the strange sensation that time had stretched itself thin. The reality of his brother's death seemed unreal, as though it hadn't quite settled into his chest. But it was there, heavy and constant. The hole in his heart was raw, gaping, like an open wound. He stood, his legs stiff from sitting for so long, and slowly made his way outside. The ground was hard beneath his boots, the earth unforgiving, as though it had decided to match his mood. Clara had already dug the grave, the edges rough and uneven. It felt too soon, too raw, and yet, there was no other choice. Jake knelt down beside her, his hands shaking as he helped to lower Jack's body into the earth. The sky above them seemed to darken, the wind picking up again, as though nature itself was mourning. Clara stood back, her eyes brimming with tears but not a word on her lips. There was nothing left to say, not now. The letter still burned in Jake's pocket, the weight of its truth dragging him down as he placed the shovel back in the earth. But as he stood there, staring at the grave, a thought crossed his mind, a thought that had been buried deep in his heart all along, beneath the anger, beneath the confusion. Jack had loved him. He had hidden it, carried it as a secret, but it had been there. And in that moment, Jake understood that love, no matter how complicated or hidden, was always real. No matter the circumstances, no matter the regrets, the love was real. "I don't hate you, Jack," Jake whispered, his voice breaking the silence. "I never could." For the first time in a long time, tears blurred Jake's vision. He didn't wipe them away. Instead, he let them fall, knowing that somehow, in some way, this was part of the healing. He had no answers. He had no way of changing what had happened. But in this moment, by his brother's grave, he was finally letting go. And then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the letter, and carefully placed it on the edge of Jack's resting place, watching as the wind lifted it gently, carrying it away into the distance. The days following Jack's burial were slower than Jake had expected. Time didn't seem to move the same anymore, each second weighed down by the absence of his brother. The ranch felt emptier without Jack's presence, without the sound of his voice, or the rhythm of his boots hitting the porch. Jake kept busy, repairing fences, tending to the horses, and taking care of what needed to be done, but none of it felt like enough. It wasn't until a week later that Clara came to him with a proposition, though Jake could already see it in her eyes. She had lost too much, too. Jack had been her heart, and now, with him gone, she was searching for something to fill the hole he had left behind. "I can't stay here," she said one afternoon, her voice strained with a quiet, determined sorrow. "This house, this land, it's too much for me now. Too many memories." Jake nodded, understanding the feeling too well. "Where will you go?" Clara hesitated, her fingers pulling at the hem of her worn dress, twisting it nervously. "I'm not sure. But I'll figure it out. I've always been able to." Jake remained silent for a moment, watching her, the firelight flickering in her eyes. She was stronger than she seemed, even if she didn't believe it herself. He knew she would survive, just as he would. They both had to, one way or another. "I'll stay," Jake said softly. "I'll stay here for a while. But not forever." Clara smiled, but there was sadness in it, a recognition of the shared weight they both carried. She had loved Jack too, in her own way, and now, with him gone, she was left to pick up the pieces. "I'll come back to help you, if you need it," she said. "But I think we both need to move on." That was the truth. They both had to find a way to live again, to reclaim the pieces of themselves that had been lost in the wake of Jack's death. And so, after the long silence that followed, Jake made a decision. He would leave the ranch for a time, travel south, and see what else the world had in store for him. It had been 2 years since that fateful day, since the letter had shattered the foundation of everything Jake thought he knew. He'd made peace with Jack's death, in his own quiet way, though the memory of his brother's love, the unspoken confession, still lingered in his chest. He had learned to let go, learned to forgive, and learned that love, no matter how complicated, was still love. The small garden behind the ranch house had begun to bloom, a patch of life amid the barren desert. Jake stood over it one evening, staring at the small plants that had begun to grow, the first signs of something new. He had worked the soil himself, planting seeds with his own hands, just as he had worked the land with Jack. But this time, the work was different. It was slower. More deliberate. A kind of love that wasn't spoken, but earned. As he knelt down to tend to the plants, Clara came out to join him, her smile softer now, her eyes lighter. She had moved on, too, in her own way. They had both found a kind of peace in their lives, a peace born of pain and sacrifice, but also of quiet survival. The air was warm, the sun setting low on the horizon. As Jake sat back on his heels, he reached for the small shovel, but paused, looking at the earth beneath his hands. The symbol of his brother's love was no longer buried in a letter or hidden in the past. It was here, in the soil, in the life they had worked to create together. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cool desert air, and for the first time in a long while, felt at peace. In the distance, the sound of a horse's hooves could be heard, steady and sure, as if bringing a message from the past. Jake's eyes flicked toward it, but he didn't stand up. He didn't need to. The man he had been, the brother he had loved, had already become a part of him, woven into the very earth, in the memories and in the love that had survived the harshest of winds. What kept a heart alive in the desert? Was it a kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go? Jake didn't have the answer. But he knew one thing for sure: survival wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live with the scars, with the memories, and with the love that remained, quietly and steadily, beneath the surface.